Hello, welcome to Deep Sight. I'm Lawrence. After several episodes on European ethnic groups and languages, do you feel like you've become an expert on the subject? Let's test your expertise with a few questions. The French and the Romanians are far apart geographically, yet many Europeans consider them both Latin peoples. So, is there a blood relationship between them? Similarly, the Greeks live so close to Rome. Are they considered Latin as well? These simple questions actually hide a lot of confusing details. Please watch this episode patiently, and you'll become a true expert in anthropology and history. I traveled to Europe when I was a child. The fog of London, the grandeur of France, the delicious food of Italy, and Syrian refugees begging on the streets. Back then, even though I didn't understand it all, I was just as confused as you probably are now. I couldn't figure out why these people, who all looked similar, couldn't just unite peacefully. Why did they have to fight and quarrel? If you can't grasp the complex historical relationships among them, you're bound to remain confused. Good heavens, with so many countries and ethnic groups in Europe, how exactly are their blood ties classified? And among these different branches of ancestry, can we learn to recognize them just by observing typical differences in their appearance? From previous episodes, we already know that to accurately understand the composition of European peoples, we need to look at two levels: linguistics and historical ethnic groups. If you want to become a beginner-level expert on European history, you only need to understand what are commonly called the four major ethnic groups of Europe: the Germanic peoples, the Celtic peoples, the Slavic peoples, and the Latin peoples, sometimes also called the Romance peoples. But here's a key point. Latin peoples is more accurately described as Romance language peoples. It is not a single ancient bloodline group, but rather a collective term for multiple ethnic groups that adopted the Latin language and culture of ancient Rome. Simply put, the first three groups are more about the original transmission of bloodlines and languages, while the Latin peoples are more the result of cultural fusion. The easiest analogy to understand this is the term Han. The concept of Latin peoples is very similar to that of the Han people. Let's start with the Celtic peoples. They were among the earliest widely distributed Indo-European peoples in Europe. During the Iron Age, Celts spread across Central and Western Europe, from the British Isles all the way to Asia Minor. Even the Galatians mentioned in the Bible were a branch of the Celts. Today, the descendants of the Celts live mainly in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Brittany in northwestern France. They still preserve Celtic languages, but their populations are relatively small, mostly concentrated along the Atlantic coast in what is called the Celtic Fringe. Next, the Germanic peoples. They originated in northern Europe, roughly present-day Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, and later expanded southward and eastward, eventually replacing the Celts in most of Central and Northern Europe. It can be said that the Germanic peoples were among the main shapers of medieval European history. Today's Germans, Austrians, Dutch, English, as well as Swedes, Norwegians, Danes, and Icelanders are all descendants of the Germanic peoples. They are mainly distributed across Central and Northern Europe, as well as the England region of the British Isles. Then, the Slavic peoples. Their place of origin is the Pripyat marshes of Eastern Europe, the wetlands in what is now the border region of Belarus and Ukraine. During the Middle Ages, the Slavs expanded massively, becoming the main population of Eastern Europe, the eastern part of Central Europe, and the Balkans. Today's Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, Serbs, Croats, and Bulgarians all belong to the Slavic peoples. They are distributed throughout Eastern Europe, the eastern part of Central Europe, and the Balkans. Finally, the Latin peoples, or Romance language peoples. A special note here: in strict historical terms, the Latins originally referred to a small tribe in Latium, central ancient Italy, and the Romans were one branch of the Latins. But the modern meaning of Latin peoples is completely different. Today, when we say Latin peoples, we usually mean the various ethnic groups that speak Romance languages, that is, languages derived from Latin. They are not the same ancient bloodline group. Rather, they are a mixture of Celts, Iberians, Illyrians, Greeks, and a small number of Germanic peoples who adopted Roman language and culture. The main members include Italians, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanians. Two key facts here. The French are primarily Celts, descendants of the Gauls, but they were Romanized, so their language belongs to the Romance family. The Spanish and Portuguese are primarily descendants of Iberians and Celts, also Romanized. Therefore, they belong to the Romance language group, not the ancient Latin tribe. For easier comparison, let's first look at a basic table. In this table, we see a more complete picture of European bloodlines. Beyond these three major bloodline groups, there are many smaller branches. And this is just the Indo-European bloodline foundation. Outside of that, Europe also has non-Indo-European peoples, the Finns, Estonians, Hungarians, Finno-Ugric language family, and the Basques, language isolate. Does this explain why they have maintained relative independence to this day? Alright, now that we've looked at the table, let's move on to the earlier question. What are the typical differences in appearance among these different bloodline branches? When you go to Europe, can you roughly tell someone's background just by their appearance, so you don't say the wrong thing? Let's summarize and try to draw some conclusions. Note, the following descriptions are based on common types in anthropological statistics, not absolute standards. Real societies have rich diversity within each group. We're talking about general tendencies. Germanic peoples, the typical blonde hair, blue eyes of Northern Europe. The Germanic peoples are mainly distributed in Northern Europe and the northern part of Central Europe. They are often considered the standard template for light hair and light eyes in Europe. Typical Germanic features include light blonde, flaxen, or light brown hair, blue, gray, or green eyes, fair skin, tall stature, and broad frames. Scandinavians, Swedes, Norwegians, Danes have very high proportions of blonde hair and blue eyes. Germans, Dutch, and English also tend to be light-featured, but southern regions have some darker admixture. In short, if you see someone with blonde hair, blue eyes, a high nose bridge, deep-set eyes, and a slender build, they likely have Germanic ancestry. Celtic peoples, red hair and freckles, the Atlantic label. Celtic peoples live mainly in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and French Brittany. Their most famous physical marker is red hair. The highest rates of red hair in the world are in Ireland, about 10 to 30%, and Scotland, about 13%. Of course, most Celts actually have dark brown or light brown hair, but the red hair gene is significantly enriched in Atlantic Celtic populations. In addition, Celts commonly have freckles, light eyes, blue or green, and very fair skin, even more prone to sunburn than Germanic peoples. In terms of build, there's no uniform body type, but they tend to be slightly shorter than Germanic peoples. Interestingly, the Welsh and Bretons have a higher proportion of dark hair, showing mixing with pre-Celtic local populations. Slavic peoples, the light-featured diversity of Eastern Europe. Slavic peoples are widely distributed, from Poland and the Czech Republic to Russia and the Balkans, and their appearance varies greatly. Overall, Slavs mainly have light hair and light eyes, but light brown or dirty blonde is more common than pure blonde, which has a slightly lower proportion. East Slavs, Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians generally have blonde or light brown hair, blue-gray eyes, relatively rounder faces, and slightly prominent cheekbones, influenced by Finno-Ugric admixture. West Slavs, Poles, Czechs, Slovaks are closer to the Central European type, with medium-shaded hair and gray-blue eyes. South Slavs, Serbs, Croats, Bulgarians, etc. are noticeably darker. Many have dark brown hair and brown eyes, with darker skin, due to mixing with Balkan natives, Illyrians, Thracians, as well as admixture during the Ottoman period. So the Slav you meet could be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Russian beauty or a dark-haired, brown-eyed Serbian hunk. The range is huge. Greeks, the Mediterranean classical profile. The Greeks are an independent ancient language group, and their appearance is typically Mediterranean. They usually have very dark or deep brown hair, dark brown eyes, and olive or light brown skin, darker than Northern Europeans, lighter than North Africans, and they tan easily. Facially, Greeks are often described as having straight noses, defined jawlines, thick eyebrows, and medium stature. Due to long-term mixing with Slavs, Albanians, and Turks, a certain proportion of modern Greeks, about 10 to 15%, have blonde hair or blue eyes, but overall dark features still dominate. Notably, Greeks on the Aegean Islands may be closer to the ancient type, while those in northern regions like Macedonia show more Slavic influence. Latin peoples, Romance language group, the dark-featured warmth of southern Europe. Latin peoples include Italians, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanians. Note that although the French have a Celtic base, after Romanization their appearance is also closer to the southern European type. Overall, Latin peoples are predominantly dark-haired, black, dark brown, dark-eyed, brown, deep brown, with skin ranging from light olive to light brown, and they tan easily. Stature is medium, and facial expressions are animated. However, internal differences are large. Northern Italians are closer to Central Europeans, higher proportion of blonde hair. Southern Italians and Sicilians are closer to Greeks or North Africans. Many Spaniards have red hair, Celtic influence, and green eyes. Portuguese are generally Mediterranean, but lighter individuals exist on the Atlantic coast. Romanians, due to living mixed with Slavs, have a noticeably higher proportion of blondes and blue eyes than other Latin countries. So, Latin peoples are not a uniform physical template, but a mixed product of Romanization. Baltic peoples, the light-featured extreme between Germanic and Slavic. Lithuanians and Latvians belong to the Baltic language family, and in appearance they are the champions of light features in Europe. Lithuania and Latvia have the world's highest rates of blue eyes, about 80 to 90%, and very high rates of blonde or light brown hair. Baltic peoples are relatively pure in bloodline, retaining many characteristics of ancient Indo-European, even more so than Scandinavians. Their faces are relatively flatter and wider, with slightly prominent cheekbones and straighter noses. Overall, they look a bit like Eastern European versions of Nordic people, but with softer features. Latvians are especially known for their light hair and eyes. Historically, they have had contact with both Germanic and Slavic peoples. Albanians, the dark-haired island of the Balkans. Albanians are descendants of the Illyrians, a small ancient branch. Their appearance is very uniform. The vast majority have black or dark brown hair, dark brown eyes, olive-toned skin, possibly wider cheekbones, and sharp facial lines. Within Europe, Albanians have one of the highest proportions of dark features. Blonde hair or blue eyes are very rare. This is related to their long-term residence in mountainous areas and limited intermarriage with other groups. Stature is medium to slightly short, with a strong physique. If you see a group of dark-haired, dark-eyed, sharply featured people in the Balkans, they are likely Albanians. Armenians, the distinctive face of the Caucasus. Armenians live in the Caucasus region and are blood-related to ancient Anatolian and Caucasian natives. Their typical appearance is black curly hair, deep brown eyes, thick eyebrows, abundant body hair, and light brown to olive skin. Their noses are usually prominent, often with an aquiline shape. The Armenian face is quite unique in Europe, different from both Southern Europe and the Middle East. Due to a history of foreign rule, a small number of Armenians have blonde hair and blue eyes, mostly mixed. Overall, their appearance bridges the Caucasus and the Middle East. Non-Indo-European peoples: Finns, Estonians, Hungarians, Basques. Finns and Estonians belong to the Finno-Ugric language family. In appearance, they are very close to Nordic Germanic peoples: blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin, tall stature. But their genetic origins are different from Germanic peoples. They come more from ancient Uralic migrations mixed with Baltic natives. Finns have a high proportion of light features, even whiter than Swedes. Hungarians. The Magyars originated from the Ural Mountains, but after more than 1,000 years of European mixing, they have become completely Central European in appearance. Today's Hungarians have hair from blonde to brown and eyes from blue to brown, with no clear difference from neighboring Austrians or Slovaks. Only a minority retain dark black hair and broad faces. Basques. They are Europe's oldest indigenous people, with an isolated language and distinct bloodline from surrounding populations. Typical Basque features: dark hair, brown or black, dark eyes, narrow and straight noses, longer faces, medium stature. They have the world's highest rate of Rh-negative blood, about 35%. They are clearly different from Celts or Latins, truly Europe's living fossils. Now that we've covered appearance, let's return to the core conclusion about bloodline classification. The Celts, Germanic peoples, and Slavs are the three major historical bloodline groups of Europe. The Latin peoples, in contrast, are a linguistic cultural category, referring to the large populations assimilated by ancient Roman civilization. In bloodline, they are a mixture of Celts, Iberians, and other groups, but their language and culture belong to the Latin tradition. Therefore, in popular contexts, it is acceptable to list Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, and Latin as the four major branches, but academically, the first three are bloodline language branches, while the latter is a language culture branch. So does Europe actually have a four major groups classification? The answer is yes. In popular contexts it is common, but in strict academic bloodline classification, it is not entirely accurate. Everyday phrasing is simple and memorable. Media, popular science articles, and even some textbooks use it. The academic distinction is, The first three are true ancient bloodline language native groups with clear common ancestors and continuous genetic markers, while Latin peoples is a language culture category. So, if you're doing light popular science or daily conversation, saying for major groups is fine. If you're doing rigorous historical or anthropological analysis, you need to distinguish between bloodline groups and language culture categories. Now let's do an exercise together and interpret a deeper case. Why are both the French and Romanians classified as Latin peoples? You might ask, the French and Romanians are both Latin peoples, but their ancient bases are completely different. The Gauls were Celts, the Dacians were Thracians. So why are both classified as Latin? This question touches the very core of the concept Latin. It is essentially a linguistic cultural category, not a bloodline category. Although the French and Romanians have completely different ancient bases, both were deeply Romanized during the Roman Empire period, adopting Latin as their everyday and official language, and later developing their own Romance languages. French, Celtic base plus 500 years of Romanization, Gaulish replaced by Latin French language. Bloodline is primarily Celtic, but language and culture belong to the Latin tradition. Romanians, Dacian base plus 165 years of Romanization, Dacian, replaced by Latin Romanian language. Bloodline is primarily Dacian, Thracian, but language derives from Latin. Core reason: the classification of Latin peoples in modern ethnic groups is based mainly on language, not bloodline. As long as a people's language derives from Latin, regardless of their ancient base, they are classified as Latin. Through today's overview, we can see that the composition of European peoples is far more complex than a simple for major groups summary. It includes multiple layers, 3 native bloodline groups, Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, 1 mixed cultural group formed by Romanization, Latin Romance, independent ancient branches such as Greek, Baltic, Albanian, Armenian, plus the non-Indo-European Finno-Ugric peoples and Basques. The physical characteristics of different bloodline branches also have tendencies. Germanic peoples tend toward blonde hair, blue eyes, tall stature. Celts have high rates of red hair and freckles. Slavs range widely from light to dark. Greeks have the dark Mediterranean profile. Latin peoples are dark-featured in southern Europe, but internally diverse. Balts are extremely light-featured. Albanians are extremely dark. Armenians have the distinctive Caucasian face. Finns are Nordic in appearance, but different in bloodline. Hungarians are fully Central European. Basques are dark-featured with high Rh-negative blood. Understanding these distinctions helps us more accurately grasp the formation, distribution, and physical diversity of European peoples. Now, after all this, I know every viewer is asking in their mind, which bloodline has the most beautiful women in Europe and the most handsome men? Of course, saying that everyone has their own beauty is a smooth and unobjectionable answer, but that's not my style. Any specific answer will invite debate, so let's use data. If we rank by international beauty pageants and supermodel data, the ceiling for female beauty is widely agreed to be Eastern Slavic bloodline. Those girls from Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, tall, with 3-dimensional bone structure, both blonde and red hair, plus a touch of mysterious coolness. Nearly half of the world's top supermodels come from Eastern Europe. There's a reason. For men, there are 2 types of handsome. One is Southern European Latin bloodline, Italians, Spanish, with dark curly hair, deep features, passionate and romantic. Most Hollywood heartthrobs follow this style. The other is Northern European Germanic bloodline, Swedes, Danes, with blonde hair, blue eyes, tall and cool, like Viking princes straight out of a fairy tale. So if you ask who is the most handsome, it really depends on taste. Choose Southern Europe for passion, Northern Europe for coolness. And the most beautiful? Eastern Slavic, basically no dispute. Of course, aesthetics are not absolute. This is just an interesting big data conclusion. What do you think? Alright, that's it for this episode on the bloodline systems and physical characteristics of Europe. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive from history to language to appearance, remember to follow, like, tip, and save. By examining ourselves through others, we learn right from wrong. By examining the past through history, we learn the rise and fall of civilizations. Let's work together for a civilized and peaceful world. See you next time.